Racist tourist slaps Black Royal Guard. She's shocked when he hits back. The Royal Guard stood still in front of Buckingham Palace, their shiny boots and formal bearskin hats shining in the sun. The famous scene was crowded with tourists like bees, who kept clicking their cameras as they looked at it. Elaine Prescott, an American woman, was one of them. Her sharp, rude voice cut through the crowd. She said to no one in particular, "Unbelievable," and her lips curled into a sneer. "It looks like these guards are robots. What do they do besides look stupid?" Elaine looked at Marcus Knight, who was the only Black Royal Guard in the group. Her hatred got stronger. Ignoring the chain obstacles that were supposed to keep people from getting too close, she pushed forward, her high heels clicking on the ground. "Hey, you!" she barked and pointed right at Marcus, but he didn't move. He didn't move, but the muscles in his jaw got tight. Elaine was not happy. "Hey, listen up. What's wrong? Not even able to talk?" "That's normal," she said, her voice full of snobbery. People in the crowd started to pay attention, and whispers spread as cameras slowly turned to the scene. A man asked his wife in a low voice, "What's wrong?" "She's about to regret this," said someone else in a whisper. Elaine took another step, getting just inches away from Marcus. She yelled, "Look at me when I talk to you," her voice getting louder. She raised her hand and hit Marcus on the cheek when he didn't move. The sound echoed and shocked everyone in the crowd to silence. People in the crowd let out gasps. It looked like time had stopped for a moment. Marcus then got up. Taking his time, he slowly turned his head to look at Elaine. Even though his eyes were burning with quiet anger, he kept his cool. His speech was authoritative and calm at the same time. "You broke the rules of the Queen's Guard." Elaine blinked, and her shock quickly turned to anger. She laughed and said, "Oh, please. What are you going to do about it? Just stand there and take it?" Marcus didn't answer. Instead, he quickly and carefully tapped the ritual gun that was lying next to him on the ground, making a sharp metal clang that echoed through the room. Right away, 2 more guards broke out of their line and walked up to them, making their presence clear. The smug look on Elaine's face broke. As she took a step back, she became aware of how angry the people watching were getting. Whispers turned into spoken words. Now she's in trouble. She deserves it. The guards circled Elaine and moved in an exact and commanding way. One of them told her, "Ma'am, step back." Elaine wasn't done yet, though. "Take a step back? Me? I'm an American. Do you have any idea who I am?" The anger in her words made her snap. Marcus then took a step forward, throwing a long shadow over her. Even though she was being rude, the force of his gaze made her step back a little. "What you're doing is wrong. You're going to leave now," he said in a firm but sharp voice. Elaine was about to say something back, but before she could, one of the guards pointed to a nearby police officer and pointed him through the crowd. Elaine felt like she was under a lot of pressure at the moment. Her pride was starting to break under the pressure of being embarrassed in public. When the officer got close, Marcus spoke again. This time, his words were clear and well thought out. "This is your last warning." Everyone in the room was on edge, waiting to see what would happen next. As the whispers in the crowd got louder, Elaine's face turned red in anger. The police officer had reached out to help her leave, but she jerked her arm free. Her voice could be heard over the noise. "Don't touch me! I did nothing wrong." She lost it and turned back to Marcus with a glare that could cut through steel. "Do you really believe that you are that important?" The man was just dressed up and acting like he was important. Marcus stood still, and his face was a mask of discipline that no one could read. Even though he kept his symbolic gun by his side, it was clear that he was tense. The crowd watched in rapt silence, with many of them recording the situation on their phones. Taking another step toward her, Elaine spat, "You can't even speak for yourself. Look at how still you are, like a puppet. Do something." Marcus was taught to be calm, and he did what he was told with all his heart. He had tightened hands and fire in his eyes, which told a different story. Elaine seemed determined to push this story to the limit. The cop who had first approached her tried again, this time with a strong but calm voice. "Please move back, ma'am. You are getting in the way of important family business." When Elaine looked at him, her eyes got narrow. "Business with the king? This is just a cheap place for tourists to visit." She made crazy hand motions to the guards. "Since I'm paying for it, I can do what I want." People in the crowd started to move around uncomfortably because they could tell that things were getting out of hand. "Someone needs to stop her before this gets worse," said a stranger close. Another person said, "She will feel bad about this. Big time." They were all ignored by Elaine. Being angry and getting attention made her feel stronger. So she turned back to Marcus. "You think no one can hurt you? Let's see how hard it is to touch you." Elaine grabbed Marcus's bearskin hat and pulled it off center before anyone could stop her. The crowd let out a combined gasp as the holy uniform was soiled right in front of their eyes. Marcus took a sharp breath in, and for the first time you could see his calm breaking. He slowly raised his hand and fixed his cap, putting it back where it belonged. He moved slowly and deliberately, and his jaw was tight. But his silence said a lot. "Won't you do something now?" Elaine laughed and took another step toward her. "Are you going to keep acting like nothing happened?" Marcus finally spoke, and the crowd could hear his deep voice like a bell. "Ma'am, you have broken royal rules. There will be consequences for anything else you do." Elaine laughed, and the sound cut through the tension like a cold, mean joke. "What will happen? What are you going to do? Hold me up." She took a step back and spread her arms wide as if to challenge him. "Go ahead. Set a scene. Show everyone what a fool you all are." The cop next to her pulled out his radio and called for help. The crowd pushed closer because they were interested and didn't want to miss out. Marcus looked like he was about to lose his temper, and everyone was looking at him. Suddenly, Elaine reached out and touched the shiny wood of the ritual gun that was slung over Marcus's shoulder. The move was quick, careless, and completely out of the blue. In an instant, Marcus did something. He turned away with an exact move, keeping the gun out of her reach. His voice spoke through the confusion. It was clear and strong. "Take a step back, right now." The power in his voice stopped Elaine in her tracks. There was a flash of doubt on her face for the first time. The crowd broke into whispers, and you could feel the anxiety. Elaine was hesitant, and Marcus's unwavering look made her confidence weaken. But she couldn't give up because of her pride. "You think you can scare me?" she asked in a low voice that didn't sound quite so mean. The cops were then called back, and 2 officers made their way through the crowd. Marcus didn't move and kept his eyes on Elaine, as if he were daring her to do something wrong. Elaine looked between Marcus and the cops who were coming up behind her, and her confidence was fading. The crowd wondered for a moment if she would finally give up. She sneered at the cops and said, "I haven't done anything wrong. You should put him in jail." The officers didn't answer, and as they stood on either side of her, they looked very serious. One of them spoke up loud. "Ma'am, you're coming with us." Elaine jerked back and her voice got scared. "That's not funny. You cannot put me in jail. I am an American citizen." The crowd held their breath as the police moved to control her. The situation was on the verge of chaos. But before they could, Elaine yelled one last time at Marcus in a very angry tone. "Now you'll feel bad. I swear you'll feel bad about it." Marcus didn't move. He was back to normal. But as the police started to lead Elaine away, he kept looking at her and his face showed a flicker of something that couldn't be read. The crowd broke up to let the police through. It was now tense and exciting. As Elaine was being taken away, her cries becoming less clear, there was a wave of uneasy clapping from the people watching. Marcus did not move. He was calm in the middle of the storm. But as the crowd split up and talked about what they had seen, one question stayed in the air. What is going to happen next? There was a different vibe around Buckingham Palace. The original shock of Elaine's outburst had changed into an electric tension, with people whispering and rushing to talk to each other as the crowd split up. While Elaine was being led away in handcuffs, cameras kept on Marcus. You could still hear her screams in the background. "I'll get your job. Can you hear me?" she yelled and twisted against the cop's strong grip. "This isn't over yet." Marcus did not move. His training had kept him grounded in place, but his mind was racing even though he seemed calm. There had been rude tourists who had insulted, slandered, and even touched him before, but nothing so blatant. The cops took Elaine and left through the palace gates. One of the other guards moved closer to Marcus and spoke quietly. "Are you okay, mate?" Marcus gave a short nod, but his eyes were still on the road ahead. He quickly replied, "I'm fine." Truth be told, he wasn't sure how good he really was. Inside the police car that was carrying Elaine, too, the mood was just as tense. Elaine was angry and sat in the trunk with her arms crossed. The police took her phone, which kept buzzing in her pocket, but she couldn't use it. She growled at the cop in the passenger seat and said, "You'll regret this." "Do you know who I am?" The cop, a middle-aged guy with graying hair and tired eyes, didn't even turn around to look at her. "Everything will be fine at the station," he said in a dull voice. Elaine snapped, "You're damn right we will. And when I'm done, none of you will have a job." The younger officer driving the car looked at his buddy and then back at the younger officer. He said under his breath, "She's relentless." She didn't hear him, Elaine. She was too busy making plans for what to do next. Before she even spoke to the press, she was practicing her speech in which she would say that a dangerous guard had overreacted and made her look like the victim. But as soon as the car pulled into the station parking lot, she started to doubt herself. She saw a group of reporters standing near the door with their cameras pointed at the car. Marcus was let go from his job at Buckingham Palace for the rest of the day. His superior officer walked up to him, but his face was too blurry to read. "Knight, the guys above you want to talk to you," the officer said in a stern voice. Marcus got stiff. "About what happened, sir?" The cop gave a nod. "That tourist has made some very serious claims. Their story is that you hit her." Marcus's eyes got narrow, and he lost his cool. He felt a spark of anger. "No, sir, I didn't do that." "For the cameras." "I know," the police officer said with a hand raised, "but it's already being looked into. The video is being looked at, and until the problem is fixed, you're on administrative leave." Marcus was hit hard by the words. Even though he had done everything the right way, his job and image were now being looked at closely. Marcus finally said, "Understood, sir," but his jaw was clenched. As Marcus walked toward the palace gates to leave, a young tourist who had seen what happened slowly approached him. With one hand on his phone, the man said, "Excuse me, I recorded the whole thing. It wasn't right what she did." Marcus stopped, and his normally serious face softened a bit. He said, "Thank you," in a low voice. The man said, "Yes, I'll send it to the person who needs it. The truth must be shown to everyone." Marcus gave a short thank you nod and then went on his way. At the station, things got even more tense. As two police officers walked into the interview room, Elaine sat there with her arms crossed and looked rebellious. He sat down across from her and said, "Mrs. Prescott, we watched the video of what happened, and it's clear that you hit the guard." Elaine laughed. "He made me angry. Being there and acting like you're better, staying still in his official role as a royal guard?" The police officer spoke up, and his tone was cool but strong. Elaine stumbled but quickly got back on her feet. "He hit me back. That's an assault." The cop and his partner looked at each other. "We haven't seen any proof that he hit you, ma'am. In fact, the video shows that he responded with a lot of control even though you did something wrong." Elaine's face turned red. "I'm telling you, he hit me. I'll show you." The younger cop walked into the room with a file and cut off her dramatic rant. He said something in a low voice to his partner, who grimaced and nodded. The older officer spoke to Mrs. Prescott in a colder tone. "We've just received more evidence. A second tape has been brought forward by a witness. It backs up what the original video showed." Elaine's confidence dropped and a flash of fear took its place. "You can't. This is crazy. I'm the one who got hurt." The police didn't listen, though. They got up from their places. It was clear that the talk was over. One of them told them to sit tight. "You're not telling the whole story." Elaine was scared and left alone in the room. She went to London hoping to be admired and spoiled. She was now at the center of a growing story around the world. Marcus sat in silence at home and stared at his phone as words of support came in from people who had been at the palace. The videos were already going around the internet, and people were starting to feel better about him. But as he read, one title stood out. "American Tourist Says Royal Guard Assaulted. A Unsettling Power Play." Asterisk, asterisk. Marcus sighed because the events of the day were making him feel heavy. The fight was still going on. In fact, it was just getting started. As he closed his eyes, one thought kept coming to mind. What would Elaine do next? The video of Elaine Prescott's angry reaction and Marcus's calm answer went viral online and started a firestorm. Hashtags like #JusticeForMarcus and #TouristTantrum were all over social media, and Elaine's name became linked to conceit and vanity. The story was covered by news sources on both sides of the Atlantic. The headlines were mostly about arguments about race, power, and respecting cultural customs. Elaine stayed stubborn, even though she had no idea how strong the backlash was. She was angry as she looked through her phone in the waiting room of the station after being freed on bail. When she saw the videos that went popular, and the many comments that were mean to her, her face turned red. She whispered under her breath, "This is a witch hunt," and grabbed her phone tight. "They're making things up. I'll make this right." Her lawyer, a sharp-dressed man who always had a frown on his face, sat next to her and spoke quietly. "Elaine, the video was very bad. It would be best for you to say sorry in public and end this peacefully. If things get worse, there could be official charges, not just public shame." Elaine told him to go away. "I am not sorry to anyone. That guard put me down. He talked like he was better than me, and I'm not going to let him off the hook. People will know the truth from now on." Her lawyer sighed and rubbed his forehead. "You're on a very thin line. The media is already against you, and the things that you did put you in a tough legal spot. It's no longer about winning. Now it's about limiting the damage." That didn't bother Elaine. She was already thinking of a way to avoid him. Marcus was also called back to Buckingham Palace for an official review at the same time. He stood in front of a group of top soldiers and palace representatives in a large but stifling room. You could feel the stress in the room. As one of the top officers walked up, he said, "Guardsman Knight, you know why you've been called here today. Even though the proof backs up what you said happened, the Royal Guard is being closely looked at because of this. The castle can't handle any more trouble." Her lawyer sighed and rubbed his forehead. "You're on a very thin line. The media is already against you, and the things you did put you in a tough legal spot. It's no longer about winning. Now it's about limiting the damage." That didn't bother Elaine. She was already thinking of a way to avoid him. Marcus was also called back to Buckingham Palace for an official review at the same time. He stood in front of a group of top soldiers and palace representatives in a large but stifling room. You could feel the stress in the room. As one of the top officers walked up, he said, "Guardsman Knight, you know why you've been called here today. Even though the proof backs up what you said happened, the Royal Guard is being closely looked at because of this. The castle can't handle any more trouble." Marcus nodded, but his face was blank and his mind was rushing. "Yes, sir. I get it." "Good," the cop said next. "We looked at the video, and while your behavior was perfect, the tourist has made a formal complaint accusing you of misconduct and abuse of power. In some places, her claims have become more popular." Marcus's jaw got tight. "Mister, it's clear from the video." "We know," said someone else on the group. "But what people think can often be more important than facts. There are calls for an outside review, and until it happens, we have no choice but to take you off active duty." Marcus felt like he had been hit in the gut by the words. Put on hold? After everything he had been through, one woman's acts now put his job at risk. Marcus spoke in a calm, angry voice. "With all due respect, this sets a dangerous precedent. It would be bad for the Guard's reputation if we let false charges control what we do." The panelists looked at each other, but their faces stayed fixed. "We know this worries you, Guardsman Knight, but this has to be done to protect the good name of the Guard and the palace. The choice is final." Marcus stood up straight and determined as he did so. "I get it, sir." As he walked out of the room, anger and denial were building up inside him. Elaine made up her mind that night to do something about it herself. She held a news meeting outside of her hotel because she wanted to take back control of the story. As reporters fought for position, she stepped up to the stage wearing a well-tailored suit and a carefully produced look of anger. She began, "Good evening." Her voice was firm, but had a hint of weakness in it that she had practiced. "I'm here to talk about what happened at Buckingham Palace because the news has lied so much about it." As she went on, the cameras clicked wildly. "All I did was voice my concerns about how tourists were being treated, and I was met with threats and violence. The Guard in question went too far and made fun of me in public. I will not stand for this wrong." It was quiet in the room, but Elaine could not finish because of a voice in the back. "Isn't it true that you hit him first?" Elaine stumbled, and for a moment she lost her cool. She snapped, "That doesn't matter." But the reporter kept going. "Several videos show that you started the fight. What do you say when people say your acts were racially motivated?" Elaine's face turned angry as the question hit her like a bolt of lightning. She yelled, "This has nothing to do with race," as her voice rose. "This is about class and respect, which that Guard clearly didn't have." As reporters asked more questions, sounding more and more suspicious, the press conference turned into a mess. Elaine's lawyer put his head in his hands and watched helplessly from the bleachers. Marcus was back at his apartment when the news showed the press conference. As Elaine told her lies, he could feel his jaw tightening. He kept getting notes of support on his phone, but the events of the day were too much for him to handle. He was surprised when someone knocked on the door. When he opened it, the young tourist from earlier was there. His face was pale and his hands were shaking as he held up his phone. The man said in a shaky voice, "You need to see this." Marcus grabbed the phone and watched the video with a frown on his face. Elaine didn't know that video of her making fun of Marcus's race and background right before the slap had been taken. When the movie was over, the boy looked up at Marcus. "Doesn't this change everything?" Marcus slowly let out a breath, and a fire started in his chest. He replied, "Yes. Yes, it does." The new video went viral online just as Elaine's news meeting was ending. There was no way to defend what was shown in the film. The public quickly and harshly turned against her, and even people who supported her stopped supporting her. Elaine sat in her hotel room by herself and stared at her phone as messages came in. Every single one was worse than the last. The nightmare wasn't over, though. She jumped when there was a loud knock on the door. The two police officers who were standing there with sad faces were there when she opened it. One of them held up a warrant and said, "Mrs. Prescott, you are being held for assault and public disorder." As soon as the police came in, Elaine's face lost all of its color. She said in a whisper, "No, this can't be happening." It was, though. Finally, the weight of what she did caught up with her, and she could no longer run away from the effects. The news stories in the morning came out all at once. From London to New York, all of the major news outlets showed the new video that showed Elaine Prescott's racist rant and how she purposely made Marcus angry. Words like shocking, entitled, and disgraceful were used a lot in the news, along with the clear term racist tourist. The video was very bad because it showed Elaine making fun of Marcus's background, his outfit, and even his appearance. It was an attack on his honor from every angle, and it destroyed any respect she still had. The royal guard got a message from the top levels of government at Buckingham Palace. Marcus, who had been banned before, was asked to meet with a group of officials, some of whom were from the royal household. Marcus walked into the room. His clothing was spotless, even though the days had been hard on him. Colonel Hastings, who was in charge of him, told him to sit down. The room was surprisingly quiet, and there was a sense of excitement in the air. "Guardsman Knight," Hastings began in a calm voice, "new proof has been found. We looked at the new footage, and it's now clear that Mrs. Prescott's claims were completely made up." Marcus nodded, and his face was calm, but there was a hint of comfort in his eyes. Another official, this time from the Crown, leaned forward. "In fact, Mr. Knight, you were a model citizen throughout the whole thing. You showed control even when you were under a lot of pressure. You showed the order and honor of the royal guard." As Marcus stood up straight, the suspension began to lift its weight. The representative added, "We've also taken the liberty of doing a background check on Mrs. Prescott." "It looks like this isn't her first run-in with the law." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Sir, what do you mean?" Before going on, the agent looked at Hastings and then spoke. "Mrs. Prescott has had similar things happen before. People have said that she files pointless lawsuits, makes false charges, and takes advantage of her supposed privilege to get what she wants. This time, though, what she did was wrong." Marcus kept quiet as he thought about what had happened. Hastings spoke next. He was proud and spoke in a strong voice. "The Crown has decided to officially recognize what you did during this event. You will not only be put back on the job, but you will also be praised for your excellent service." The person from the Crown added, "And there's one more thing you should know, Guardsman Knight," before Marcus could answer. "People are angry about the video of Mrs. Prescott making fun of your background and your outfit. The public's outrage has been huge, and the Crown is acting in a way that has never been done before." Marcus took a small step forward because he was interested. "She has been charged with assault, public disorder, and because of the attention from around the world, she has also been charged with encouraging racial hatred. Because of what she did, her government has officially apologized to the Crown." The weight of those words hung in the air, and the seriousness of the situation became clear. At the same time, Elaine sat at the defendant's table, clearly upset, in a dark courtroom full of reporters. She didn't have the confidence she had shown at her press conference. The constant pressure of public shame and legal consequences had broken down her carefully constructed front. The prosecution's case was devastatingly clear, and the now famous video was shown to the judge. The room shook with shock as Elaine's mean words filled the air. Her voice shook when it was her turn to talk. She stuttered, I didn't mean any harm," but the words didn't mean anything. The judge's gavel sounded, and the case was over. "Mrs. Prescott, what you did was not only illegal, it was also very bad for you. This court thinks you're guilty of everything." Elaine's face scrunched up as the sentence was read. A big fine, having to go through sensitivity training, and not being able to leave the UK for 2 years. Later that night, Marcus stood in front of a huge group of cameras outside Buckingham Palace. It had just been reported that Marcus had been reinstated and given an award. On either side of him stood his superior officer and people from the Crown. Marcus started. "I want to thank the public for their support." His voice was steady but quiet, full of pain. "This has been a hard time, but it has taught me how strong it is to be humble and follow rules." "Do you have anything to say to Mrs. Prescott?" yelled a reporter from the crowd. Marcus stopped and kept his eyes steady. "I don't want to talk about that with her. The things she does speak for themselves. Respect, kindness, and decency are ideals we all need to keep, though. I hope this serves as a reminder." People cheered, and the moment was caught on camera and shown to millions of people. A boy in the crowd called out, "Thank you, Marcus," as Marcus walked back toward the palace gates. Marcus turned around, and his angry face changed into a small smile. He gave a quiet salute with his hand and then went on his way, knowing that this was more than just his own victory. People all over the world would remember that moment because it was a stand against wrong and a step toward change. After the dust had cleared, Buckingham Palace was once again a sign of peace and royalty. A lot of tourists rushed to its walls to take pictures and be amazed by how well the royal guards were trained. But for Marcus Knight, the events of the past few weeks remained like a faint echo. They reminded him of how fragile respect is and how strong he needs to be to protect it. Marcus sat on a park bench next to the Thames and watched the water flow slowly by. The air was cool and crisp, making me feel like I could start over. Even though he was officially back at work, he hadn't gone back to his old tasks yet. He decided to think instead, and the calm after the storm helped him feel better. The sound of footsteps coming closer stopped him in his tracks. The young stranger was the one who first shared the video of Elaine's bad behavior. The man thought for a moment and then sat down next to Marcus, holding a small package. The man said with sincerity, "I just wanted to thank you. I can't believe what you did and how you handled everything. People saw how strong you really are because you didn't just stand your ground. Marcus smiled a little. I did what I believed in. Not a thing more or less. The man turned his head away. That wasn't it. It was good to see someone like you stand up to all the hate and stupidity. A lot of us got hope from it. He gave the envelope to Marcus. I believed you might want this. I wrote it about what I saw that day and how it made me feel. Marcus took the envelope and his eyes showed how thankful he was. His voice was steady as he said, "Thank you." Marcus read the letter as the man left. The writer used simple, emotional language to talk about what had moved him to fight unfairness in his own life. For Marcus, it was a quiet but powerful confirmation that what he had done had affected people far beyond the palace walls. Elaine Prescott's life was a mess across the Atlantic. The public's outrage and the court's decision had left her alone and shamed. Her travel ban was just the beginning. Clients stopped doing business with her, and people who used to be loyal to her stopped being around. Elaine looked at herself in the mirror while she was alone in her fancy New York apartment. She had to face the ugly truth of her deeds for the first time. It looked back at her with no flinching, the pride, the entitlement, and the failure to see others as partners. The front page of the newspaper next to her said, "Royal Guard's dignity triumphs over hate. Asterisk, asterisk." She picked it up, and her hands started to shake a little. She felt the weight of real regret for the first time in weeks. She didn't know if it was too late to make things right. For the first time, though, she knew that she had to change. Marcus finally went back to work when he got back to London. The first day was quiet, and his fellow guards said nice things to him when they saw him. A small child with a hand-drawn picture of a royal guard came up to the barrier while he stood still in his formal stance. The child's mother gently pushed him forward, and the boy stood there with the picture in front of Marcus. A short moment later, Marcus's eyes went to the boy. The boy didn't move, but a faint smile crossed his lips. Mom said in a low voice, "Thank you for showing him what honor looks like." The boy smiled back. Marcus felt really happy as he walked home that night through the streets of London. He wasn't sure how the event would test his character, but it did. It also showed him how important it is to have respect, restraint, and honesty when things go wrong. One thought kept coming to him. Asterisk, asterisk. Strength isn't about power or getting even. You have to stick to your beliefs even when everyone else tries to shake you. There was no way Marcus could change the world in one day, but he knew that every kind and brave thing he did was a step in the right direction. That was enough. While he was gone into the night, the city lights flickered around him. He was a silent defender of the ideas he had sworn to protect,